Well, again, welcome everyone. And the topic today is learning to let go. I love these topics that Narayani assigns me and forces me to talk on because they give a lot of scope, so it's not like I have to be narrowly focused. And this one has a lot of scope, but also just a lot of practicality and something that I think everybody can relate to. And so what I'll be talking about is different aspects of learning to let go of old hurts, of pain, of suffering, learning to let go of old habits and fixed ways that we're stuck in, basically learning to get unstuck. And so this is, I think, true for everybody. I think so much anxiety in our lives and so much of our thoughts at times that really sort of pull us down are things from the past. And I think this is universal. It's just everyone has to deal with it until we're completely free. And I think we've all had many hurts from the past. You can't go through life without going through a lot of pain or suffering, betrayal, all these things. It just seems to be Divine Mother's plan for this world. And I don't know if she wanted it that way, but that's the way it's turned out. And so we just have to learn to deal with it. And learning to let go is a big part of that process. And so I'll talk about different ways that we can work with that and do that. Now, I've always enjoyed a cartoon of Garfield the cat, this one cartoon, it shows Garfield and he's behind a couch. It shows him from behind. And he's at the bottom of the couch, but the back of the couch is completely shredded by his claws. And his claws are up in the air and just the stuffing is coming out of the couch and everything. And Garfield is saying, everything I let go of has claw marks on it. And this is how many of us, we don't really let go, it's just things are taken away from us. And that's not really letting go because we're still holding on to it and leaving claw marks on the person who we're letting go of sometimes or the thing, and it's just wrenched out of our hands. And that's not really freedom, because in the end of this life, especially at the end of life, we have to let go of everything. We have no choice in the matter. And if you're still holding on with desire, attachment at the end of life, any of these things, then we have to come back. And the desire of, oh, it could have been better, I wish I could, this could have happened, I wish this, I wish that. Those desires at the end of life will keep coming us back again and again. They've brought us back, who knows, 40 million lifetimes they've been bringing us back. And I think for everyone here, by the time you come to this place and start being really serious about wanting freedom, we've had enough of that. And now we're only asking how. How do I become free and how do I let go? And so it's a daily practice. It's a lifetime practice, but the beauty of what I have seen with these teachings that we practice here is that they are really, really, really effective. There's just a book that just came from America that one of the devotees at Ananda wrote. And she interviewed many, many people at Ananda who had lost their spouse or a different person who was a lifelong Kriya Yogi. And it's about their lives and how they lived the end of their life and the degree of freedom that they had in their lives. And just without exception, each one did it in their very own unique way, but there was a degree of freedom that just, you see that these things really, really work. And so what I'm saying is not theory. It is theory, but it's also reality. And if you practice these things, they do work, and we have seen them work. So this is not just a theoretical class, but it is the way that we can actually find freedom and let go. And I'll talk about different ways of approaching this. There's another story of letting go that Swami Kriyanandaji talks about. At Ananda village, we have these creatures called raccoons. And they're very troublemaking creatures. They look like a bandit because they have this thing around their eyes that makes them look like a bandit. You've probably seen cartoons of them. And they have, almost like monkeys, they have opposable thumbs and they can grab things with their hands. And they're just so intelligent and so creative. And I've had to deal with them over the years. They dig up your garden and they tear up your fountain. And one time my wife saw them tearing up our fountain And there was a family of them. It was the mother and about 5 babies, and they were all running around causing trouble. And one of the babies, the fountain would come out of this little geyser of water, and it had its hand over the water, and it was spraying its brothers and sisters. It was directing the water at them, and they do mischief just for the sake of mischief, and they just throw trash everywhere. And so when a particular raccoon becomes a troublemaker, we trap them in, it's like a cage, and you put some food in there, and they go in one end of the cage to get the food, and then springs the trap and the doors close, and you have this raccoon inside this cage, and you take the cage away and you take it far, far away. And so Swami Kriyananda tells the story of a raccoon that we had at Ananda village. In the cage, the trap was there, but rather than going through the end of the trap, this raccoon was really smart and realized that it could reach with its hand through the side of the trap, through the cage, and grab the food that was the bait. And so the only problem was that when it grabbed the food and tried to take it out, because its hand was around the food, its hand wouldn't come out the cage. And so in order to bring its hand out of the cage, it would have to let go of the food. And so the people came to check the trap the next morning, because they're out at night, sneaking around in the dark and causing the trouble then. And they came in the morning, and the raccoon was there, and it was stuck because its hand was in the cage. It wasn't in the cage, but it would not let go of that food. And all it had to do was let go of that food and pull its hand out, but it would not do that. It was so attached to that food. And the people came and they picked up the cage with the raccoon and took it away, and the raccoon still would not let go of that food, even though it was being caught and captured and all these things. And we all laugh, yeah, that's kind of dumb that a raccoon would do that, but just introspect just a little bit, and you start to realize, okay, maybe I'm not a whole lot smarter than that raccoon. And so we hold on to things that are against our own good, and we know it. We know that I'm holding on to this old hurt, this person, this attachment, this desire, and I know it's not good for me, but I just can't let go, but I'm trapped, and they're dragging me away, and I still won't let go. And so attachment, desire, learning to let go is just something that, we need to learn how to do it. And it's a practice, but there are some ways of working with it that's not just about letting go, because if it was just telling the raccoon, just let go, well, we've been told to let go, and we're still holding on to some of these things. So there are some ways that we just have to work with energy, with redirecting our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, attachments, and moving forward in these ways is really some of the ways that I'll talk about. Now, one of the things I think that touches everybody is that letting go of old hurts, and people especially, grudges or resentment against someone who did something to us, and maybe they really did treat us unfairly and in a mean way, and rightfully they do deserve to have the wrath of God coming down on them, and our wrath, or calling the wrath of God and just not letting go. And a friend of mine, the way they put it is that when you do this, you're giving that person rent-free space inside your head and your heart, and you're allowing them to stay inside of you, and we don't want that. And when I heard it that way, I realized, I'm keeping them inside me, and all I have to do is just let go of that. And one of the ways, the tools that I've worked with recently in recent years, is that when there are people who are negative towards you, I have found that you can either be fighting that negativity and doing hand-to-hand combat, but I have found a better way of working with it, and this is one of the ways that I'll talk about, is that if we put out enough positive energy and really move forward really, really strongly, and not just fight a negative person or the negativity, what happens is that, because negative people, it's almost like they're grabbing our legs and our ankles and keeping us from going forward and holding us back and holding on to us. But I have found that if you really put out a lot of positive energy and move really forward in your life in some way. It can be with an inner life, but if you do it strongly enough, you kind of leave those people in the dust in a way, or you're moving so strongly that they can't tackle you anymore because they can't hold on, because you're not fighting them and dealing with their negative energy. You're just dealing with a positive force going forward. And that's one of the best ways to leave the past behind and to leave all these old negative things, either within ourselves or people behind, is to put out a lot of positive energy and really, really move forward. Sometimes that means physically leaving somebody behind and just moving forward by changing your environment and the people you spend time with, being with more positive people, having more satsang. And you'll find that that's one of the best ways to let go, because again, letting go is not just as easy as just, okay, releasing your hand, because it's bound up with feeling, with emotion, with desire, with attachment. And so we do have to use a lot of spiritual principles when we do this, but also using a positive antidote. You can't, as Swami Kriyananda, he wrote a beautiful song where he said that you can't drive out the darkness with a stick, and you can't just beat out negativity and fight it with more negativity. He said you need to just turn on the light, and what you need, and he also said what you need is love and light. And when that positive force is strong enough, then the negativity, both within ourselves, but also with other from outside forces, tend to just fall away in the face of a really greater divine power and energy. So the same goes for negative emotions that we have, addictions we have, because it's the same thing. What is a negative emotion that's habitual? In a way, I would almost say that a negative emotion that we have that just keeps coming up, it's like an addiction. In some way, almost you like that emotion. You just, maybe you're mad at someone, and so expressing that anger and having that emotion just somehow, it's addictive. It makes you sort of feel like, okay, I'm dealing with it in some way. So we can't suppress these things as a way of letting go. You have to actually find a positive answer to it and a positive sort of an antidote as a way. And so affirmations are really, really helpful. Swami Kriyananda ji wrote a book on called Affirmations for Self-Healing. And a lot of this is about healing. But these affirmations don't work by pushing away the negative and, quote, letting go of just releasing. It's really about developing these really positive qualities, that these negativities just, they sort of shrivel up and die. I use this analogy many times of you walk into a dark room in the middle of the night and the cockroaches are there and you don't realize they're there, and then you turn on the light and there they are, and they all go running away and hide to find some dark corner. And so all you need to do sometimes is just to turn on the light, and the darkness within ourselves also will scurry away. They just can't face being in that light. And so when we have negativity within ourselves, there's a tendency sometimes for ourselves to turn away from the light because we're embarrassed, or I had this desire or addiction or attachment. And really the answer is actually to go towards the light. It's not the time to turn away from the guru, because people do out of shame or embarrassment. We have a negative addiction or attachment and we indulge in it, and we see Yogananda, we sort of kind of hide our face like this, and really that's the time to go to him and just get in his face and get in Divine Mother's face and say the prayer Yogananda gave, which was really forceful. He didn't meekly go to Divine Mother and say, oh, I'm sorry, I was so bad, and I just forgive me, and as a sort of in a weak way. He just went to Divine Mother and he said, pray like this. He said, Lord, thou hast created me against my will. Free me. That is my prayer. And he said, take your faults to God and take your bad things to Divine Mother and put them into the light. And this is what I've seen, is that when I am dealing with something that I just can't overcome, I find it's better to just keep going to God and the Guru, even in the midst of sort of giving into it, to say to them, you created me against my will. You didn't train me how to deal with this stuff. You just threw me out into this world. I was born and I didn't ask for it, and I didn't get a great upbringing from you to show me how to respond to desire and attachment and anger and all these things, and you need to help me and demand that. And again, I think sometimes just that approach puts us into the light, and that darkness starts to go away. But the second thing that it does is it kind of gives us a positive energy and momentum, a forward momentum, because we're not going to just sort of slither away from the darkness. We have to develop energy, willpower, strength, and that type of energy comes from God. But when we go to God as children of the infinite and understand that when we're doing it, that starts to change our identity and our identification from this weak little person who doesn't have the willpower to overcome this particular thing or is unable to let go, and it empowers us to become divine warriors, divine light, have this divine power. And again, not in an egotistical way, but just really in a very divine way. And again, the light, very often that light, it needs energy behind it to be really a powerful force for change in ourselves. So moving forward in a very positive, dynamic way, but also just individually within our own selves. And just so whenever there's the negativity or an old hurt or something we just can't let go and it's dragging us down, just find some really positive, dynamic way of moving forward in your life. And sometimes it means physically pulling away from a person, for example, but even someone that you love who's just, you can't either let go of or you're unable to because you have a family duty with them. But sometimes you do need to be strong and forceful. And I'll tell a story of one of my brothers. Our mother was was in a nursing home, assisted care home, because she couldn't take care of herself. And my older brother, moved all the way across the United States to a whole different place just to be near her, to help support her. He didn't live with her, but he took care of all of her needs, everything like that. And she was in her 90s. And she started becoming just really taking advantage of our brother and being mean and abusive and verbally. And he had given his life to help her, and nothing he could do was working. So finally, he just told her, I'm going to stop visiting you. And he did for like a whole year. And here she was, in her 90s. He was the only person she knew with a family in that whole side of the United States. And he lived right in the same town. And he didn't visit her for a whole year. This was like tough love. But he did it out of love and out of a strength of positive energy. And she understood why. And she had that year to think about it. And she saw that he wasn't coming. And finally he called her and he was kind of checking in on her to see how she was doing. And he visited her finally after a year. And she really got it. She was really positive, incredibly positive and kind. And it wasn't like she apologized and made up or anything. She had changed. And that's what it needed, was this forceful, positive approach with this thing. So you have to be creative. You have to be ready to try anything with love, with kindness, if it's another person. But sometimes you do have to leave a person behind if it's just a situation like that. So do what you have to do, but with a divine energy and positivity. And very often I have seen that with tests like this and other tests, that God gives these things not to punish us, not to hurt us, not because we've been bad and so this is coming to us. It's to help us develop a certain quality. And so this is another aspect of this that I found really helpful, which is just learning to trust God. And that trust, I have found, really connects us to the Guru, to Divine Mother. And just to trust Divine Mother, okay, you're giving me this test, because again, she created us against our will, and it's all her. And you're giving me this test, but I also know that I'm your child, and that you'll give me the strength to be able to overcome this test. And so learn to trust in God, but to always go back to God, to practice everything that we do here, energization exercises, all these things. And this is another aspect of this, is changing our own level of magnetism is just extremely important. Because when our magnetism is either weak or negative, it attracts negativity, it attracts weakness. When our magnetism and energy is really strong, then negativity, it's like turning on that light. Negativity tends to get repelled, and we start to attract positive influences in our life. We start to attract more positive people. And this is what happens when we start meditating, when we start doing the energization exercises. It really, more than anything else, people don't realize how much magnetism has to do with how our life goes. And people think somehow, well, I have to change this part of my life and that part of my life. And when it comes to magnetism, I like to use two analogies of how magnetism works. One of them is when I was in grade school. We would get a piece of paper, and our science teacher had us put iron filings or iron powder on top of the paper. And then we would put a magnet under the piece of paper, and the iron filings would correspond to the underlying magnetism. And you could move the iron filings, but they would always go back to the underlying magnetism. And this is what happens when we just try to change our life outwardly. And you see this, people who get in negative relationships, they get rid of that person and they find another person. It's just the same thing. It's like almost like they get back with the same person, just in a different form, because the underlying magnetism hasn't changed. And so we need to change the inside. And when we change the inside through all these positive things, and again, affirmation is a real powerful tool. It's at our monastery, we use the book, Swamiji's book, Affirmations for Self-Healing, and it's 52 readings, qualities for every week of the year. And so every week of the year, you can spend a week working with the quality of enthusiasm, or the quality of joy, or the quality of love, or the quality of energy. And there's a short reading explaining the divine principle behind it. Then there's an affirmation that you do very powerfully that really changes your magnetism on the inside. And then there's a prayer that you do as part of it. And we have a webinar series that we now do every Friday night at 8 p.m. from our monastery, where we spend half an hour doing the affirmation, talking about that quality. And I found that the weekly practice of that is really, really life-changing, because you start to draw these divine qualities into yourself, and you start to draw this divine aspect and energy into yourself as an attitude, as a magnetism. And you feel your magnetism change when you do this affirmation for enthusiasm every day for a week, and you go over the reading. And so magnetism can change everything. It really can. And so work on that understanding. Magnetism is based on a few other things. One is just having more energy. When there's energy going through the spine, divine energy, when willpower is going out through us into activity, it creates like an electromagnet, because an electromagnet is energy going through a wire. And when that energy is revolving and going through the wire, there's a magnetic field around that wire. And it really has a power that will change your environment, and it will change those iron filings so that you almost don't have to start adjusting the outer circumstances of your life, which is what that powdered iron represents. If you just change the underlying magnetism, you'll find that your life starts to change, and you start to be able to easily let go of these things. This is what I've seen with Kriya Yoga. Very often I've just seen, I can't tell you how many times people have told me, well, I don't know if I'm ready to learn Kriya Yoga because I still like to smoke, or I'm not a vegetarian, or maybe I still like alcohol sometimes. And those are not a barrier to learning Kriya, of course, because the reason we learn Kriya is because we're not perfect. If we were perfect, we wouldn't have to learn Kriya. And Kriya helps us to become perfect beings. And I can't say how many times I've talked to people who have struggled with any of those different things I mentioned for years and years and years. And they learned Kriya, and they said within 3 months after learning Kriya, practicing these things, and making it really an important part of my life, they said this thing just dropped away all of its own accord. I didn't even have to work at it anymore. As I'd been doing all these years, it just fell away on its own. And that's the power of changing the underlying magnetism, is that the negativity and these things that we're trying to let go of, they can't stick to us anymore, because there's no type of magnetism that draws them and attracts them and keeps them stuck to us. So work on changing the underlying magnetism. One of the ways also to do this is that if you're struggling with something to let go of, sometimes the answer really is just to replace it with something positive. Rather than trying to get rid of it or push it away or negate it, just change it or replace it with a positive habit. This is why, again, why the affirmations are good. But think in terms of, rather than trying to push anger away, if you have a tendency to be angry, for example, because if you just keep trying to push anger away, it's almost like it's self-generating, because you're angry at the anger. You get angry at yourself for being angry, and it just keeps going and going and going. And rather instead work on the positive antidote or positive quality of whether it's kindness, compassion, being joyful and positive in some way. There are many positive antidotes to anger that you'll find. And so work at replacing it with something positive, because if you just focus on the negative, it's very, very difficult, because you're always focusing on the darkness in the end. And again, this song that Swamiji would sing in the early days of Ananda, the one about you can't beat out the darkness with a stick. He also said that there are people in America who, there's a certain sect of Christianity where they really focus on sin. And we're all sinners, and get down on your knees, and Satan is tempting all of us. And in that song, the way Swamiji puts it, basically that Satan must be very pleased with all the attention that you're giving him. and the darkness it wants us to sort of see that as the reality, and to acknowledge it and say, oh, you're so powerful and I'm so weak. And so every time we focus on the darkness, we're feeding it. We're giving it some energy, and we're making it more powerful. And the way out of it is just to turn in the other direction, turn towards the light, turn towards these positive qualities, attributes, and attitudes. And so you'll see that day by day, step by step, and just try to see this as a long-term process. Yes, in the short term, we want to put out a lot of energy and magnetism, but let's face it, we've probably had some of these issues for thousands and thousands of lifetimes. And I think it's unfair at times, because we've been, Swamiji once said to one of our monks that he's probably been around for 40 million lifetimes. 40 million lifetimes. Can you imagine how long that is? And what that means is that for 40 million lifetimes, you've been indulging in all the desires and attachments that bind us and keep us from being free. And so we have 40 million lifetimes of momentum to overcome, which is it's mind-boggling. That said, it seems impossible to get out of it in one lifetime. But again, I've seen with so many Ananda people who just day by day, week by week, year by year, practice these things, everything that we're talking about, that at the end of one lifetime, I've seen freedom that is just, to me, it's awe-inspiring. But it's also just across the board with all the Ananda people I've ever seen, read about, known, who have practiced these things for decades. When they leave the body, there's a degree of freedom that is just 40 million lifetimes worth of stuff just gone in one lifetime. That's not just a promise, it's actually the reality that I've seen. So there's an article by Swamiji. It's a chapter in a book. The book is called Religion in the New Age. And the chapter is called Death, the Final Exam. And it's a really interesting chapter, because I think we all try to avoid thinking about death, and one of the beautiful things I like about being in India is that death is not hidden away. It's right, you see it. And in America, they really try to hide death. You know, people die, and you know the hearse comes and sneaks in there in the middle of the night and takes the body away, and no one sees it. And here I've spent some weeks at times staying in Puri, and in Orissa, and there you're walking on this beautiful street with the ocean on one side, like, you know, Southern California with all the fancy places and beaches there. It's almost like that on one side, and the other side is the burning ghat, and you see them bringing in the bodies, and you smell the bodies being burnt. I mean, I know what burning flesh smells like because I grew up, you know, with a family roasting hamburgers and meat, and you smell it, and I think, you know, this is just, it's so un-American, but it's good because it reminds us that, yeah, we're just temporary visitors here. Someday I'm going to face that, and how am I going to prepare for that? And so this is what Swamiji, why he wrote that chapter, is just to help us to learn to let go step by step, day by day. And when we do that in the right way, we reach the point where at the end of life, there is such a high degree of freedom. A lot of that freedom comes through divine grace, because we don't do it on our own. We can't do it just by ourselves. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. So one of the ways that Swamiji talked about as a practice, which I have found really extremely helpful, he said every night as you're going to sleep, or just before you go to sleep, he said mentally create a bonfire and put on that bonfire all of everything, your hurts, your desires, your attachments, everything that happened during the day, everything you're holding on to, and just offer it into that fire every night. And I have found this really helpful as a way, one, of sleeping more easily, because you lie asleep and there's all this anxiety and stress and worries, and basically you're just holding on to all this stuff. And I find it really helpful when I go to sleep at night, just to say to myself, okay, tonight may be the night where I'm going to leave the body. I'll die in my sleep. And I want to be completely free, so I'm just going to let go of everything before I go to sleep, just in case. And every morning I wake up, so far, it hasn't happened yet, but when I wake up in the morning, I feel like there's a degree of freedom that I don't know that I would have had if I hadn't been able to some extent, let go every single night. And if you practice this regularly, you'll find that by the end of life, there is an extraordinary amount of freedom. And part of it is just this attitude of just moving forward step by step. Every time we stumble, just get back up, move forward again, and work with all these different things that we're talking about here. I'll talk a little bit about my wife, she left the body about 9 years ago. And she had just karma like all of us, anxiety, fear. She especially had the fear of dying. That was one that just wouldn't go away for the longest time. But she worked at it, and she did all the things that I'm talking about. But in the end, it's the grace of God comes and really, really helps us if we are really, really sincere about this. Someone's pointed out about Swami Kriyananda. It was actually a talk I heard him give recently, a recording. And he said that it was just so interesting. He was so encouraging and supportive. But in this talk, he said that those who sincerely want to give their lives to God, to the service of a guru, of a master, those who just have that sincerity to want to do it, he said it's so rare in this world. I mean, billions and billions of people in this world, very few are even willing to take that step. And he said that Yogananda, the masters, and Divine Mother, when they see that, it's like, wow, here's somebody who actually wants to give themselves back to the light. And they really acknowledge it and are appreciative of it, not in the sense of us patting us on the head and saying good boy and good girl, but in the sense of wanting to help us to get through the rest of the way. And this really is how divine grace works. Swamiji talked about it very often as cooperating with grace and us putting out the energy to work with divine grace. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. But I know with my wife, when she left the body, all those fears had gone away. She had cancer that she'd been fighting for many years, and it recurred finally after 10 years, and suddenly it was all over. It was in her brain, and just she knew that it was there, and the doctors had to do a scan just to confirm it. But she just, by that point, she was free. And she kept telling me, "Don't worry, I'm free," because I was worried about her and her mental state, her physical health, how she felt physically, and she just kept saying, "Don't worry, I'm free." And for her to say that, she would not overstate such things. She was this Russian who could be very stoic and understate things, but there was a degree of freedom that really was, I think, humanly impossible, because I know she had karma just like all of us. She had fears, she had anxieties, she had desire and attachment, but just by simply continually doing all the things we're talking about, at the end there was a degree of freedom that I think maybe she was completely free, and there was joy, there was laughter, there was humor. Now everybody goes through that final exam in a different way. And that's the beauty of this book that I'm talking about. There's probably about 15 or 20 chapters about all these different Ananda people who left the body, and they're all just completely unique. One person just had a big party at the hospital where everyone was there around her all the way to the last moment, and just joy and laughter. My wife, she just went inside. She didn't want to deal with the past at all, not out of regret or pushing it away. She was moving forward. People wanted to see her and talk and go over old times, and she didn't want to have anything to do with that, because she had left it behind and let go of it, not because of consciously letting go and pushing it away, but because of moving forward really, really strongly to the next life. There was just such a strong degree of inner freedom. And this comes from the way that you live your life. So start now, preparing for that final exam. I had a friend, he's still a very dear friend. He heard the story of Gandaji, who supposedly, after he was shot and as he was falling down to leave the body, he was chanting Sri Ram, Jai Ram. And my friend, this was very early in our lives at Ananda, so he didn't know as much then as he does now. And he said, "Gosh, I wish when I die I have the presence of mind to chant to God." It's like suddenly I'll start, "Oh yeah, I'm dying, I better think of God." And I laughed. I said, that's not how it works, because Gandaji was always chanting to God, and so you didn't have to suddenly pull his act together and at the last minute call to God. He just was always calling to God, and so it was very natural. And by now, my friend, I think he's been calling to God for his whole life, and he's a very devoted person, so that at the end of his life and other people's lives, that it's just a very natural step of just being in God. And when you're in God, when you pray to God and talk to God your entire life, you'll find that when that last moment comes, you're going to ace that final exam, because it's not something that you can easily cram at the last minute. Yeah, maybe you can, but if you've done the work starting now, which I have to say, don't belittle your own efforts because they're not yet perfect or not yet reaching to the heights. And this is what I've seen, that just the sincerity of staying with it and wanting to try all these things and doing the best that we can, that without exception, divine grace I have seen come into people's lives at the very end, even when they were far from still being perfect, and even when they were still maybe holding on to some things. And so just don't underestimate the power of grace to really help lift us up in the end, and even in the moment, even now. So maybe I'll talk a little bit more about divine grace in this context, that Swamiji again talked about cooperating with grace. It's not something that just automatically comes to us, and God likes some people and doesn't like others, and it's not just a matter of being even receptive. Receptivity must be there, but it can't be just passive receptivity. It has to be working with the divine and working with God. Again, doing the best we can. We don't have to be perfect, but really in the end we can't perfect ourselves. We can only put ourselves into that flow of grace. I think it was Ananda Ma used the analogy that Divine grace is like a river, a very quickly, swiftly flowing river. And on the banks of the river, it's very muddy and there's brush and trees, and you're slogging along trying to make progress on your own. But if you just start swimming out into the river, you start taking a few steps, and then you start swimming and floating, and the water is still not moving, it's still stagnant, so you're not really making progress. So if you just lie there passively, you'll still be stuck. But if you swim and make the effort to go out to the center of the river and really put out a lot of energy and effort, you go out to that place where the current is flowing very strongly. And when you do that, that's how you enter into the flow of divine grace. It does take our effort, but more our effort cooperating with the divine, with devotion, with sincerity, with willingness, simply doing the best that we can do. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be our best sincere effort. But when we do that with God, then the power of divine grace is what carries us to the ocean, as that river would do. Another way of looking at this is, a friend of mine recently, just a couple weeks ago, said that if you want to enter into something really positive and really good, and it was talking about our monastery here, if someone wants to come and join it, he said you can't just kind of show up and think that you're going to get caught up in this nice flow, which you do. But he said it's like catching a moving train. He said you have to actually be running already to some extent to be able to jump on the train. Otherwise the train's just going to throw you off because of all the positive power and energy. So that's another way to look at grace, is just it's a moving train that we're trying to jump on. And we don't have to run as fast as the train. You just have to have some speed built up. So we do have to put out some energy of being able to sort of cooperate with the energy of that train moving along. And so work with very consciously that it's not us on our own doing this. It's working with divine grace. There's a story I've shared before where I was in Rishikesh one time, and I was meditating on the banks of the Ganga with a friend of mine. And it was just the two of us. It was a very remote beach, early in the morning. There was not another soul there. And we were meditating. And so I went, after our practice of Kriya and meditation, to go bathe in the Ganga. And I went out into the river, and I suddenly stepped in some quicksand. And I got stuck in this quicksand. And it's just, I've been in quicksand other time before that, so I'm not afraid of quicksand or these things that Divine Mother throws at me, because she's done a lot of really strange things to me and almost killed me many times, with a rock hitting me flying down a mountain and being hit by lightning and all this strange stuff. So when I got stuck in the quicksand, I started laughing at Divine Mother and saying, okay, now what are we going to do? You're going to have to get me out of this because you put me here. But I had my friend there. And because I've worked with quicksand another time, my friend, I told him, stand on solid ground right there in the river, because I was up to about my waist in the water and stuck in the quicksand, which you can't get out of quicksand by yourself most of the time. You're just good and stuck. It's like being in cement. And it doesn't suck you down like in the movies. You see people. If you're ever in quicksand, the only way that happens is if you really freak out and start thrashing. But it doesn't really happen. If you just stay calm, you're stuck, but you don't keep sinking. So I knew I was safe. And luckily the water was not too rapid. So I asked my friend to come and reach out and grab my hand. And what happened was, if I had just held out my hand and said, okay, Lord, your grace is going to come save me, pull me out. Well, my friend he probably would have pulled my arm out of the socket, because that's how stuck I was. I couldn't just depend on his strength pulling me out. So I had to do two things. One is I had to be pushing to get out in the right way. And I also had to be holding on to his arm. And I had to be sort of cooperating with him with the way that he was pulling me to get me out of the quicksand. And so, yeah, very soon he was able to pull me out and everything was good. But this is how we cooperate with grace. We have to, affirmations, for example, these affirmations affirm a divine quality that really is already who and what we are. I mean, why do we need to affirm it? Well, because we need to put out some energy to sort of run up to speed a little bit and before we can jump on that moving train. And we have to work with God. We have to work with the Guru in these ways by putting out some energy ourselves. But when we put out energy and it's in cooperation with the divine energy and the divine power, that's how we become free. That's how we become free with the Guru's help. This is why Yogananda ji, he said that divine freedom comes 25% is our effort, 50% is the grace of God, 25% is the Guru's effort on our behalf. And he said that effort on the Guru's part on our behalf is also the grace of God. It's all the grace of God in the end. But we have to do our 25%. And he said that 25% isn't a 25% effort on our part, it's 100% of our effort. But when we combine it with divine grace and the Guru's help, then we can become free. And again, I've seen this too many times, so many times in my life, of people who have worked in their lives in this way, with everything that we're talking about, and really developing just an amazing and high degree of freedom, just in one single lifetime. And I have to say this without exception, honestly. That's why this book is so inspiring, because you see all these different types of people who have come to Ananda. And it's not like there's one type of person who becomes free. It's you, me. It's just every personality. We have our own unique way of doing it. And this is why it's not good to compare ourselves to others, except maybe to compare ourselves as being really strangely different, but also realize that we are uniquely different. And again, Swami Kriyanandaji, and I swear this is true, someone's trying to find a recording of him saying this, but I heard it at least twice in my life. He said, "To thine own funky self be true," meaning, yeah, we are who we are, and we have some funky qualities. Someone here in Mumbai said, "Did you really say that word, funky?" I said, "Yeah, that's the word he used." This was kind of coming out of the hippie era, so that word was probably more in use during that time. But we accept where we are and our quirks and our personality, and God would not have put us into a particular situation, personality, body, form, unless we could get out right from where we are. And this is what we've seen, and this is what I've seen, that it doesn't matter where you start, and your personality and your nature, your faults, your shortcomings. I've seen again and again that those who just are sincere and put out that effort make a great degree of freedom, of just letting go of all these old karmas, because karma really is just something that's holding on to us and we're holding on to it. And this is just what the Mahamrityunjaya mantra is about. It's not that those karmas are dissolved or the karma itself is not dissolved or killed. It's the cord that ties the cucumber to the plant is just severed and cut. The cucumber is still there, the karma is still there, but the thing that binds us to that karma is severed by the divine grace, by, in this case, this Mahamrityunjaya mantra, and calling to God as Shiva to free us from the bondage, not necessarily from the karma itself. So I think we'll just take a very short break.
Okay, welcome back. As Devarshiji was speaking, I was just in my mind mentally letting go of all the points I had. So it was a good lesson on letting go. So the advantage is then now I'm free to speak whatever I have to. When this topic came about letting go or learning to let go, the first thought which I had was, okay, let me look back at things where I was finding it difficult to let go or had challenges in my own life or anything. And I haven't had a significant life in terms of number of years, but I still have had some years to my pocket. And interestingly, I couldn't think of too many. The reason being not that I didn't have issues of letting go, but because it's only in the now and this moment that the issues come and they look big. But if we were to look back at challenges, they look like, oh, that seems now like nothing. Like, okay, I'll give you an example. Think of your 10th standard or 12th standard board exams. Like, how many people are fearful of that today or have issues of, oh no, it was challenging in life. Well, it was at that point, but now no. I was listening to a talk of Swamiji, and he said he was traveling somewhere, and as he was moving, he saw something very large and huge, some kind of creature move on his right side, and he was intrigued what this creature was, and so he just turned to look at what this creature was. And all he found out later was that it was just a small fly, and because it was so close to his eyes, it looked like, oh, this is like a huge creature, but it was just this tiny thing. So just it helps when we want to let go to think of life in terms of longer rhythms. And when I came to the spiritual path, I like in the very early years, I asked Nayaswami Jyotish, not in relation to letting go, but I asked Jyotishji that, it's hard for me to really tune into feeling. I mean, reason and intellect, it's just so easy. That's how it works for me. But feeling is a little difficult. I think a lot. And he replied to the question directly, which was that, men go more by reason, women go by feeling, and things like that. And then he said, just expanding the question and not just relating to this question, he said, whatever we deal in life, and just like Devarshiji was saying, that try to replace it with the positive opposite of it rather than dealing with the situation. And so in this case, Master, when Swamiji met Master and Swamiji was intellectual, Master didn't tell Swamiji, stop being intellectual. He didn't stop there. He didn't say just stop being intellectual. He said to replace it with devotion. He said, get devotion. Get devotion. So it's extremely important not just to say, oh no, I won't be doing this. And we know the story of Swamiji, which he shares when he was 22 years old, and he decided, was he 22 years old? Okay, he was very young. I don't know exactly how old he was. And he wanted to get rid of this habit of smoking, which he had. And every time it went on for a year, and he would not say, oh, I have failed or anything. He replaced it with the positive. I have not yet succeeded. Replacing it with a positive affirmation rather than saying, oh, I failed, or I couldn't do it, I will do it, or I haven't yet succeeded, meaning there is a success, it's just not there yet. That's more important than anything else. Then one thing about letting go, we can compare letting go very similar to giving things up, giving it up or whatever. And one of my brother monks, his name is Premdas, some of you may know him, we were just traveling in the car someday and he said, give up. That's such a spiritual thing. I said, wait a second, giving up is like, giving up your hopes, aspirations or whatever. It doesn't seem so spiritually uplifting. He said, no, giving it up to God. So it sounds very, very simple. Like, it's not just about, letting it go, but what are we replacing it with? What are we replacing any challenge we have in life with? Giving it up to God. So if it's a family situation, I'll share a story which I had when I moved to the monastery very soon after. I think it was day 2 when this came, and we still lived in Pune. And Devarshiji was sharing with us some time back about environment is stronger than willpower, how important environment is. And I saw this like literally face to face in my life, how drastic environment can be impacting us is when we had the monastery in Pune, we had 2 flats opposite to each other, how in buildings you have, and both the flats were us, and a group of monks would live in one house and a group of monks were in the other house. And some of my dear relatives or friends or whatever you call it, who were not very supportive of my spiritual aspirations, were there paying me a visit the very next day and sharing, let's have a conversation about your stupidity of what you have been doing. And they were convinced and they threatened me and they did all they could. Let's not go into the threats, but it was very intense. But it was interesting for me because here in the house which I was staying were my buddies, you might call them for the time being. And on the other room, in the other house, were all the monks who were there because they were just giving us some space. And when I was in this room, I was being attacked and challenged, and I'll do this and I'll do that. And if you don't change your decision in life, and it was intense as it could be. Just imagine anything you hold, dear to your life, and that's being challenged. And it was intense, but just if I would go to the other house and just within 10 seconds I would be laughing and joking and talking about Master and talking about Swamiji and thinking of, oh, what do we do tomorrow and where can we go out, and oh, 2 weeks later is my birthday and this is happening. I go to this room again and it's again hard, it's again intense. A few minutes later I walk back to that room and it was like Divine Mother was really making it a point. If I didn't understand environment is stronger than willpower by then, she was making it clear that how important it is for us to be surrounded by positive people, and we just can't do enough of it. If we are here, just soak into the vibrations, because it's not easy to just do things on your own, hold your own. Yes, we do gain some strength, but we can't fight the battle ourselves, and the gurus help us, our guru bhais help us, and the guru who is not in the physical body can help us through our guru bhais who help us in our next step. So try the next time, don't try to reason it out, how do I get out of this situation, oh, this is so difficult. Just Dhyanaji would often say during her satsangs, she would just say, get in the room. That's all that is needed. Just walk into that door, sit down, and finally you start breathing oxygen and it just feels like, yeah, this makes sense and life is to be happy. And about death, Devarshiji was sharing, but I had a funny story that when I was in the corporate world, it's intense. Sometimes if the environment is, I see eyebrows raising, but it's fine, I relate to it. It can be intense, and not everyone is very positive or supportive of what we want to do. And what I would do is, the moment I would walk out of my office, the first point I would make is either meet a Guru Bhai or call a Guru Bhai or walk to a center or see a video of Swamiji. But anyways, I got into this mode of tuning into death, the final exam, and I read this book, the chapter in religion in the new age, and somehow I got hold of a PDF and some talks and everything. I downloaded it into my computer, and I thought, before I go to office, I'll start going to office like 10 minutes before, and I'll read this. It just gives perspective to life. I feel so joyful. It just doesn't seem everything is so serious. And then when, people yell at you, or this didn't happen and that didn't happen, it's like, it's fine, it's okay. And around one of these times, one of my immediate superiors was really mad at me and upset at me. And interestingly, I had an intuition that very morning that he's going to be mad at me. I don't know how do these things work, but he called me and he told me, where is this report? I said, oh, it's not ready. He said, but you should make it ready. I said, of course I should make you ready, but didn't I tell you I'll be doing this thing? And you told, yes, very well, do it. He said, no, you should do both together. I said, it's not possible for me to do both together. And I was just very calm, and he was getting upset because I was replying so calmly. And at one point he just went crazy and he said, I am so disappointed with you. And he was yelling over the phone, and there was a few other people around him. And I was like, well, yeah, it makes sense for him to be disappointed with me. And I said, I don't disagree with your disappointment. And he said, what? I said, yeah, I don't disagree with your disappointment. It makes sense. I wasn't holding on to anything. I just let him be the way he was. I let it go. And the next moment, he just disconnected the call, and the other superior called, and he said, what did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. He said, no, he just didn't know how to deal with the situation anymore, and he let it go. And it just helps us to be surrounded by that positive magnet. We can't really, we can't expect to have that strength on our own, but 25% is our effort. So let's do the best of the 25% which we know of, tuning into Master, reading Swamiji's book, reading the books of Swamiji, listening to their talks, but then deal with the situation from coming from your strength rather than anything else. Just one more story. I have kind of a few stories relating to my corporate life, which was very interesting. There was this time when the same superior of mine, he had a knack of being nasty. So by now you can put someone in the picture or fill in the blank over there. It can be anyone, need not be a boss. It can be, a nasty friend who's not supportive sometimes, if you can call him a friend. I mean, from your side, he's always a friend, but we want to be friends with everyone and give love, but sometimes they don't act friendly. And sometimes relatives don't act as relatives. Master said the relatives were given to test you sometimes. So anyways, I walked into a conference where I was, not a conference, a meeting room, a conference hall, but a meeting room, and I was late by 10 minutes. I was working on something else and I was late, and there was this my dear friend, and everyone around was there, and they looked at me and they were like, okay, this is going to be fun to see. And I walked, I said, I'm sorry, I had this commitment and I got late, and I walked in. And he was his usual self, and not being kind and mean to people. And it's hard to, like Devarshi said, we don't want to be giving rent-free space in our brains when such things happen, but it can be hard when things are very close. So anyways, the meeting got over. I spoke to my colleague and I told, that was interesting. He said, yeah, that was very interesting. I said, he was tuning into something different from what I was. So I thought, okay, fine. And then I shared, he was very mean and nasty. He's like, really? I said, what do you mean? He said, the moment you walked in, he cut down being mean. I said, do you mean that was less mean than before I walked in? He said, yeah. And it was interesting because, that impacted him, that it wasn't like very verbal. It wasn't like, oh, okay, fine, now I'm going to be less mean because Vineet is here, or because that person is here, or this person is here. It doesn't matter, but people do tune into vibrations. And if you are calm, then people have the lesser tendency of being nasty. And just, in fact, weeks before him, I was having trouble with letting go because he had again been nasty. But I had prayed for him. I had really sent healing prayers for him. And over the last 2 days, I've been asked many times about friends and family. So that's why this is tailored about that. It's difficult, but we can pray for them, and we should understand that they are acting in good faith, or one can understand that they are acting in good faith. And how do we pray for them? Well, first we meditate. We don't really handle the situation face on. It's going to be very difficult that way. Come to a point of center within your own being. Get really calm and feel that love, feel God's love coming to you and then going out to them, and feel that love. That just imagine if you feel so badly, or if I feel so badly, if someone is nasty at me, how bad or how intense it should be in their hearts for them to project that vibration. They're suffering much more in some ways than anyone else. So why not share our love? Because at least we have the teachings and we have the spiritual path. Sometimes I've done this, and you can also try it. When it's not like to combat them or send them negative energy, it's actually to protect ourselves from a shield of negativity, or so that we can let go. Is Swamiji shares it in his book Raj Yoga, The Art and Science, and probably other books, where he says when you feel consciously being attacked, or you feel negativity being projected towards you, you can use the mantra Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha and make a cross. And it's not again to send them negative energy or anything. That's not the thing which we're talking about, but rather to protect ourselves and to create an aura of protectiveness and light, so that we are not affected, and in turn we can share goodness with other people. And there were a couple points, but we are running short of time. So just maybe one thing. Oh yeah, one thing which comes to my mind when we speak about letting it go is because why do we have the challenge of letting it go? Is because there is a situation and we haven't accepted it fully, and we just are trying to keep it away. Or there's a situation we are anxious about which will come in the future, the result or something like that. So sometimes, which I've tried and which Swamiji suggests is, and I'll read what he says, is we feel anxious of getting into this situation or accepting this. And Swamiji says, think of the worst possible outcome of the situation. If you're finding it hard to let go, think of the worst possible that could come. And let's say death has to come, that could be the ultimate, and then accept it. And once you have accepted the worst possible outcome, you just are not fearful anymore of what is going to come anymore after that. It's just like you're going to get a 10th standard question paper, but you are prepared for the college third year question paper, and then you feel, "Arey, ye to 10th standard ka hai, ye to chalta hai." And I'm giving a very superficial example, don't quote me on this for anything, but just prepare yourself for a more difficult thing and accept it inwardly. And I'll read what Swamiji said, and then Devarshi ji will share more. Okay, Swamiji, this is what he writes in the book Living Wisely, Living Well. Imagine the worst thing that could happen to you. Then still, imagining, relax your heart and accept it. If you can bear that visualization, inner freedom will be yours. Why not then accept whatever comes? Do you fear death? It can't be avoided, so why fear it? When it comes, accept it, willingly, even gladly. For know this, you yourself can never die.
I think that fear of death is one of the most difficult things to let go of. Swami Kriyananda wrote my wife to help her with that. He said, you've done this, you've died millions of times already. When it comes, it's going to be the most natural thing in the world. It's just, you've done it 40 million times or however millions of times. So it's just the thought of it is the only thing. And the reality of it is that you'll find that it's just a lot easier than you might think. But also with grace, you'll find that it's just beyond, not even beyond easy, it's actually blissful and joyful. Not that we should seek it out, but that when it comes, there will be freedom. So any questions that people have about letting go, learning to let go in certain situations or contexts or?
All doubts have been answered.
All doubts have been answered, okay.
I'm wondering, the last thing you said, this fear of death, do you really think it's the fear of letting go of the ego that you're not there anymore, or is it the fear of the pain or circumstances before the death?
I think...
Because I don't feel this fear of death at all.
Yeah.
But the circumstances can be horrible. But
yes, and I think
will be...
I think for some people it's the fear of pain that comes. But even there, I know Swamiji has said that those who are in God, that people who have, and he's recounted stories of people who have died and come back. They've had near-death experiences, but where they were clinically dead, who actually were in conditions where you would think they should have been in a lot of pain. And the body was maybe in a lot of pain, but they said that when they left the body, there was no pain. Even before they left the body, that pain was turned into joy and that there was freedom and release from that even before it happened. And so he has said that, especially when you're in God, that even that is not something to be afraid of, and just to let go of that thought also. Any other questions? Comments?
Does the love for your closest relatives tend to hold you back? Or at the end, if you want release, do you have to let go of that too?
I think there's different kinds of love. And so if love can be binding, if it's too personal and if there's attachment there. But divine love can be liberating. And so I think you just have to differentiate between that. And yes, love can bind us and attach us and keep us here and make us not want to leave, just as anything else can keep us here.
So that's going to happen every lifetime. You're going to have those relatives.
I wouldn't say that you have to, if you work on developing divine love, and I think this is what I have seen and also experienced, that being on the other end of it, of seeing a loved one leave the body, that, yeah, you don't want to hold on to the person. And a good example is my wife, when her sister it was just her sister and I were with her those last days. And the sister was very attached, and she was very emotional. And it was really hard for her because there was 3 of these girls who were sisters, and she was, the other one had also left the body previously. And I could tell that her attachment was holding my wife back from leaving. She was holding on so tight. And this was confirmed because it was just becoming too intense for the older sister. And so she had to leave for a day just to get away, so she did. Her husband came and they just went away for a day. That was the day that my wife left the body. And so she needed the sister to go away and not be holding on. And so yeah, human love, if it's really emotional human love, can be binding. And we see this with relationships that we have, that sometimes even a negative relationship, that attachment can be binding, and yet
even if we have let go, their love can hold us back.
to some extent it can, yeah. And so, but I think a relationship, it's two ways, and I think by loving divinely, we can also kind of cut the bonds that the other person has also to some extent, not entirely, but we can only do our part of it. That's the thing. And this is one thing that I have found really helpful, especially in recent years, is that we can't control what other people think about us, say about us, do behind our backs, their negativity towards us. We can't control that. And I've seen this, just the very same action from me, a good action, causes one person to be negative towards me and another person to be positive. Praise and blame, just part of duality. So I can't control what other people think about me, how they act towards me. And this is, I've learned just really clearly in recent years. I'm kind of dense and slow to learn sometimes, but I can control only how I feel towards others, what I give to others, how I feel about them, how I speak about them. That I can control. And when I control that in the right way and in the highest way, I have found that I just feel such a great degree of freedom, and in a way to not concern myself anymore with what others think about me. So yeah, we don't have to be held back by another person's attachment and their feelings towards us. And my wife, I think she also she didn't want to leave the body in the presence of her sister, and just so I think she knew that, and she didn't want to hurt her sister in that way. So in a way, maybe she wasn't being held back. I think she was just waiting for her sister to step away, and then as an act of kind of kindness and generosity, sort of an ultimate act in a way. So, any other questions, comments?
We're trying to work on eliminating our desires, achieving self-realization. Isn't that also desire?
Yeah, and that's the positive desire. That's the positive antidote. So if we just try to kill all of our desires and attachments without having the positive, that's a negating consciousness and energy. And so rather than thinking that we have to defeat all of our desires and attachments just to create the desire for God and the desire for freedom. And Yogananda said every desire that we've ever had has to be fulfilled in some way. And it's a little bit of a scary thought, because look at all the 40 million lifetimes of desires. I mean, it's like, oh my God, that's, each lifetime we probably create many lifetimes of worth of desires. But then with every desire has to be fulfilled, and the desire for God also has to be fulfilled. And so if we can start to generate and awaken and cultivate that desire, so that becomes the strongest desire in our lives, then these other desires just tend to fall away. So work on that positive desire for God. And that's when, Swamiji said to Master, he was attached to good food, Swamiji was, and he liked good food. It was one of the last things for him. And he expressed that concern to Yogananda, and Master said, oh, come on, this is trivial. He said, when ecstasy comes, all these other things will go away. So work on the desire for God, for ecstasy, for freedom and divine bliss. And that's actually the ultimate positive antidote to everything else. And yeah, at times we get hit by other desires or attachments, and they knock us over, and we have to kind of deal with it in the moment. But in the meantime, in the background, if we're constantly working on desire for God, then these other things will tend to fall away. The way Swamiji put it one time, he said earlier in his life he was working on overcoming a desire, and he said in the moment he just couldn't overcome it. He couldn't rise above it. But he said he knew that in the meantime, if he worked on practicing devotion to God, to the Guru Seva, meditation, if he just kept working on that, the way he put it, that the karmic scales, the weight and the balance would start tipping, and eventually the desire for God and that karma and that energy and magnetism would finally tip the scales and tip the balance. And so our part is to work on that desire. And it's a good desire to have, because it's the desire that ends all desires. And when that one is fulfilled, there's no more desires. But when other desires are fulfilled, it's just one more desire after another, and it never really satisfies. Any other questions, doubts, problems, letting go, holding on?
If there is a situation in one's life, for example, if a person wants to be successful in his career, I'll take my own example. If I want to be successful at my career, and that attachment is also giving me some suffering, and how to know that I should let go of it or I should push myself more towards?
Yeah, and so this is a really good question. And Yogananda, when someone had a samskar or a deep-seated inclination to be successful in business, for example, or career or family, he wouldn't just say, this is desire, delusion, get away from it, cut it out, because that's just suppressing it. And so his way was more to transmute these things and lift them up. And so he would say, if this is a compulsion or an inclination that's really strong, then do it for God, do it with God. Do it as a way of helping others. If your success means success for others, and do a business that serves others, and use a business as a way of either inspiring or helping your customers or the people that you work with. And so if you bring God and light into that situation rather than suppressing it or pushing it away, that's how we grow spiritually. And sometimes I think these inclinations and desires are almost planted by God to help us learn a lesson and to move forward in a certain way that we have to move forward. And so in some ways, I think for you in that case, you need to work with it and put out the energy and learn how to put out energy to succeed even, and to strive for success perhaps in the right way with God, for God, and give the results to God in the end. If you fail gloriously, then for some people, I think the karma in this life is to fail gloriously in just a really dramatic way as what they're supposed to do. But the results, give the results to God. But do your part to put out. If you're in a situation, family, whatever, and that's where you have found yourself when you come onto the spiritual path, then put your energy into that, but do it with God and do it in the light as a way of learning lessons and growing spiritually in a positive way. And that's the positive antidote in a way of just going through a situation rather than just pushing it away. Cool. So we don't need to let go of all these things either. It's not like if you have children, I'm going to let go of my children. Okay, this little, bye, I'm letting you go now. They're little tiny children. You can't do that. It's a karma to fulfill and to do it in the right way and in the most positive way possible. And sometimes it's the same with a career that we've been given the inclination to fulfill in this life. Any other questions? No. Okay. So one of the things that I mentioned to Narayani, which I didn't even talk about, but she said, let's talk about that, is this expression I've heard, let go and let God, which is a way of saying that, yes, we have to put our will into something, but do the best that we can, put out all the energy that we can, and let God take care of the results, take care of the rest of it. Our part simply is to do our very best, offer it to God, and then let God take care of the rest. And this is just a way of almost like being a partner with God, with Divine Mother, with the Guru, in everything that we do, with our family, with raising children, with our career, with our business, even with our sadhana. Just to do the best that we can and let God take care of how it works out. And our part simply is to do the most positive and best that we can and let God take care of the rest. And this is again cooperating with divine grace. Okay, so why don't we close with a prayer and ask God, Divine Mother, the Gurus, to help us be free, to let go of all those things that are holding us back, to learn the positive lessons that maybe we need to learn first before it's time to let go of those things, and to ask God and the Guru to guide us to the right understanding in all of this. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, great Masters, guide us, free us from all limitation, from all delusion, that we are bound by our desires, by our attachments. Replace all these things with the desire only for Thee, to give ourselves to Thee in service, in devotion. Free us, bring us home. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.